On Monday morning, President Trump changed his 50-day deadline to a 10 or 12-day deadline. Seems kind of unspecific to me, but maybe that's par for the course. But in response to that, the question is, what was Russia going to do? And Russia has kind of said, didn't really pay much attention to it. So we're going to see what's going to come to bear now, because we're just days away from finding out the end of this deadline. And we're going to find out what's going to happen. Well, to try and make a little bit of sense of both what Trump, Ukraine, and Russia are thinking about this and what all of this stuff actually means, we have back with us Patrick Henningsen, host of Sunday Wire, patrickhenningsen.substack.com. Also, and just a great analyst with a lot of experience, and always grateful to have you on the show, Patrick.
It's great to be with you, Danny.
Well, listen, let's just jump right in. And so if anybody's been, living under a rock or something and missed it, here was Trump yesterday, kind of dropping a bombshell. Nobody was really expecting this in the public anyway, when he was talking with Keir Starmer and mentioned that, this whole 50-day thing, I'm going to do a different number.
I'm going to make a new deadline of about 10 or 12 days from today. There's no reason in waiting. There's no reason in waiting. It's 50 days. I want to be generous, but we just don't see any progress being made.
Okay, first of all, I want to look at those numbers, because if you say that you have a new deadline and it's 10 or 12 days, that pretty much confirms that you really don't have a plan, because nothing is wired at all. What do you make of that?
Yeah, is it 10? Is it 12? Just like what he feels like today, I'm not sure. The problem with Trump is, the problem with us is we're also meant to think that he's sort of doing this on the fly. And we also have to understand that behind Trump, plans are afoot. So he might be saying this in an impromptu way to try to preserve his mystique as a unpredictable, strategic, ambiguous actor or whatnot. That's what his proponents like to say. This is the great thing about Trump, is the opponent never knows what move he's going to make. But behind the scenes, plans are afoot. Now, when he gave the 50-day ultimatum, you have to ask yourself, what do they have planned for 50 days? Because Trump and this administration have form. They did this to the Iranians. They gave them a 60-day ultimatum. We know how that ended. And so what is going to be after 10 to 12 days or 50 days? Is it going to be more sanctions? Is it going to be a surprise attack, a gallant raid by the Ukrainians, hitting new targets within Russia? Who knows? Or is it going to be replacing Zelensky? There has to be some sort of payoff at the end. Otherwise, Donald Trump's words don't really have any weight, even by his own standards. So I think there's something going on behind the scenes. The question is, what is it, and to what end? That's the question.
Well, yeah, I mean that is the big question there, because at least ostensibly, it's the same towards what end as the 50-day, which is an unconditional ceasefire. It's what a lot of the information coming out of the White House yesterday, and some of the other spokesmen were talking about that. He still wants to get to this uncompromised total ceasefire, which I mean, I can't imagine how anybody actually in Washington, D.C., anyone thinks that there's any chance that Russia would ever agree to an unconditional ceasefire, which they have categorically rejected, 600-700 times. So then what is the purpose of doing this? Is it just for domestic purposes here in the United States? Is it for European sake? Is it for Zelensky's sake at home? I mean, what do you think?
I think they're lining something is being lined up. And if we look at the form, preceding every single negotiation or every single potential line in the sand from a diplomatic point of view, whether it's coming from Washington or whether it's the U.S., Europe, and Ukrainians and the Russians, it's always been some sort of a surprise attack or active sabotage at the end. And that generates headlines, it generates public relations, it generates weapon sales, it's good for the defense stock. So that's the only play that we've seen so far repeatedly. So I'm going to have to bet significantly on that as a potential outcome? Because as you said, Danny, that it's not serious to have any expectation there's going to be some unconditional ceasefire, especially at the behest of Donald Trump, who's completely erratic and inconsistent in his own rhetoric there. And the Russians certainly are going to get on with business as usual, and as are the Ukrainians. I mean, I haven't seen any moves by the Ukrainians that show any serious will to negotiate or bring this thing towards any kind of a political or even interim political settlement with the Russians. So that's not happening. There are a lot of things going on in Ukraine politically right now with Zelensky. Perhaps we can talk about that. But I think the main point is Russia is not Iran. And I think I hope the United States isn't doing this broad brush treatment and using this sort of zero-sum mentality when dealing with the Russians that they have with the Iranians, because these are two different state actors. And they're not going to get any kind of a result from Russia, and they're not going to be able to bully them or intimidate them either.
Yeah, more on that Iranian comparison in a minute. But you talked about Zelensky, and he's got issues going on at home. And who knows, maybe there's some talk about having him removed from office or replaced or something like that. Well, you'd never get that idea from listening to him, because after he heard Trump yesterday, he was all smiles.
Today, there is an extremely important statement of President Trump. And this is true. It is Russia that does everything to break the peace efforts and delay this war. Every night strikes, constant Russian attempts to hurt Ukraine. Indeed, there can be peace if you act strongly and decisively. And we have repeatedly said, and all partners know, that sanctions are a key element. Russia respects sanctions, respects such losses. Peace, however strong, is possible. Ukraine, as always, is ready to work as productively as possible for America. To work with President Trump in order to end this war with dignity and lasting peace.
I almost hesitate to even ask the question, but I mean, we remain completely unmoored from any sort of reality. And Zelensky, I guess, buoyed by this comment from Trump that, whatever, 2 or 3 weeks ago when Trump said, all right, we're going to release the pause. We're going to send you more stuff. We're going to send you more weapons. And now then we're going to shorten the delay for whatever is going to follow next with the sanctions or any other kind of surprises. And yet he's still saying, okay, there's a diplomatic end. There is a peace with honor, negotiated settlement. It's just got to be one that I choose. And by the way, Russia's the bad guy. They're the only impediment to, I mean, what do you make of all that?
Well, the thing that he said there, which was bizarre, he says Russia respects sanctions. I'm not sure what he means by that, because sanctions really haven't affected Russia in any significant way since this beginning of this conflict in February 2022. In fact, quite the opposite. Russia has been resilient, and their economy is growing while the European economy is zeroed out. And so has the other Western economies as well. So this threat of sanctions, I really don't see, and doesn't have any real weight in terms of negotiations. So that was weird by Zelensky. It shows that he's must be really out of touch with reality himself. He's desperate. The problem with the United States is their element of surprise is gone. And they've been able to maneuver and do things in the last year and a bit because they had this idea that they knew that Russia had expectations that there was a possibility of some goodwill there. You've seen it in all the statements from the Russian delegation, but they're under no illusions now, and there's no expectation of diplomacy or even sincerity coming from the West anymore. So if the Russians, like the Iranians, always left the door open, and now everybody sees what happens when you leave the door open with the United States and its allies, quite frankly. So that's gone. That's huge. They always took advantage of that and were able to score some wins, albeit small victories, if you will, or symbolic victories, but they could still do that and sell that back to the Western public. But those days are over now. So the United States has already played those hands out. So there's nothing there. There's no W for Donald Trump, other than the only W I can see for Trump right now is basically kicking the can down the road and extending this conflict and keeping Europe happy, keeping the military-industrial complex happy. That's the only real W for Trump, because he's not going to get any sort of, he's not going to be able to dictate the terms of the end of this conflict at all. So, the other problem with sanctions is this is a huge problem, because he's threatening secondary sanctions against anybody trading with the Russian Federation. So this isn't going to fly, because he's basically come into office saying, I'm going to end the conflict in 24 hours. Now he's swung all the way to, I am going to declare economic warfare on all of our allies who are trading with Russia, including India, for instance. I mean, these are not lightweight countries. What's he going to do? He's going to put 100% sanctions on Chinese goods? That's not going to happen. None of this is going to happen. This is really such an act of desperation by Trump, because for some reason, him and his administration are completely lost. They have no idea how to proceed in any real meaningful diplomatic format. There's no rules. There's no ability to articulate even the basic rule set, because you can't go into negotiations unless there's an underlying rule set. Let's use the Donald Trump property metaphor. If you walked into Manhattan, he's going to do a deal, wants to build a building in Atlantic City, whatever. You can't negotiate it, bring the contractors in, and then have them build it halfway, and then turn around and say, I don't want to do this anymore, and then go and shoot the city planner or threatening to kill the mayor of New York. There's a rule set, even in the business world in the United States, that Donald Trump operates in. It's the same in the international system. And now he's finally getting caught out, because he's trying to write his own rule sets on the fly. And that's been his style. He's been able to get away with it, moving between the gray areas of some of these events and processes in terms of, what you might call negotiations, but really are not negotiations. But it's over now. All those moves have been played out. There is an international rule set that other countries are working under, but not the United States. And now it's showing. Now it's really showing. And what he's doing now is just, he's lost. That's my only conclusion. I really have a hard time trying to work out what the objective is, what the intention is.
That's been one of my frustrations too, because and that's a great point you bring up, by the way. Where does Trump even want this to go? I mean, if he's playing 4D chess, if he's doing all this stuff to just look one way or to set something up, I mean, towards what objective? That even I forget about whether it's realistic. What does he want? Because you're certainly not going to compel Putin to come to the table. You're not going to enable Ukraine to win or reverse the situation on the ground. And absent those two possibilities, taking those two off the table, the only thing that could be said less, and we'll talk about this, is it, you said a second ago, the military industrial complex would certainly like it. And one might get that idea listening to also yesterday, Jack Keane.
The Europeans were very clear. This is not a money issue for us. We're going to pay whatever it costs to take care of Ukraine, and we're going to purchase the weapons from the United States and do this. So they are really all in here. And where the president is, he's all in as well. Putin has got to be taking notice of that. He wanted to undermine our resolve in the Europeans, and he certainly wanted to break the will of the Ukrainian people to put more pressure on Zelensky so he would make major concessions. Big picture, Putin has been at war for 41 months. He still hasn't taken significant territory in Ukraine. His presidency is at stake, and he wants those concessions being made by Zelensky, and he wanted them to be supported by the President of the United States. It is not happening. So he has to begin to rethink where is he and how much stake is he going to continue to risk his presidency by this involvement.
Surely, Patrick, surely he doesn't believe any of that. I mean, you can say that Zelensky is detached from reality because he's got life and death on his decisions here, but you can't make that charge against somebody like Jack Keane. What do you make of that?
I don't know, Daniel. I think you can make that charge with Jack Keane because
Okay.
they're still recycling these old tropes like Putin hasn't taken any significant territory since the first days of the invasion. I mean, And it's all personalized to Putin. Again, Putin's presidency is in trouble. Putin's presidency is not in trouble. His approval ratings are very high, higher than any Western leader, probably in our lifetime. And not only that, after securing Lugansk and Donetsk and the territorial borders of those regions, that's a massive win, symbolic win for Russia, to the public as well. They're backing this effort. So that's not going to fly. So what is he doing there? The key word was in the beginning of Keen's statement. He's talking about the financial transaction. So that's the fallback position for the U.S. is it's good for business. So if that's the worst position, if that's the fallback position, then they're quite happy to go with it. So basically, if you want, the conspiracy theory here is it's a win-win. Russia is going to achieve its military and security objectives, and the U.S. and the West and the military-industrial complex will secure its financial interests. And in that case, I would say it's a standoff. And so it's status quo on the battlefield. And then in the background, everybody's making money in the West, and we'll see where the lines. We'll see where the lines are drawn.
People.
Yeah.
And let's also just kind of do a bit of a dive here on the sanctions issue alone. So that's what Keen is advocating here. That's what Zelensky just said. And you also heard that's where Trump's coming down with these sanctions that Lindsey Graham is so excited about. But when you look at the number of actual sanctions, whether these are on a group, a state, or individual, there's somewhere around 16,000 specific sanctions on Russia, 18 full packages, especially from the European Union, since this war began here. And you see all it's done to weaken Russia is to weaken them by making their military stronger, and retooling their industry to where it can crank out considerably more of the key armaments for their offensive operations, much more than we can for offensive or defensive. So when you look at just the elementary facts, I just have to wonder, why is Trump saying this? Why is he advocating for something like this? And it looks like, and you can never tell, it looks like he believes that it actually will compel compliance from Putin. And then you have Jack Keane saying this, because the alternative is, if they don't actually believe it, is that your second scenario there might be more plausible, that they know it's not and they don't care. They're okay with it because it's going to continue to keep the military-industrial gravy train rolling. Can we be that cynical?
Yeah, you can, but just even the Europeans they have to trade with Russia. For the energy sector. Look at the energy sector. Europe is buying oil, still having to buy oil and gas from Russia. I think in 2024 they did about 23 billion or something like this, plus the uranium, plus a bunch of other things. So what's Washington going to turn around and put 100% tariffs on everything coming out of Brussels? And he just made a great trade deal or whatever with Ursula von der Leyen, which isn't really a deal, just a lot of announcements. But he's going to turn around and just declare and threaten everybody, including all of your allies. You're not going to have any allies left.
Well, now let's just take a look at that one aspect, because you mentioned earlier the fact that there's still plenty in Europe that are getting Russian gas. We're still, even right now, it's less than it was by a large portion, but there's still a considerable percentage of oil and gas they get from Russia. Now, if this tariffs comes into a play and we say, okay, that's it, now it's in effect, and there's 100% tariff on anybody who gets Russian petroleum, and then we try to start slapping something on China and especially on India, but then we don't slap it on the European countries, because I can't see him doing that, because that would only hurt the West. It wouldn't hurt Russia as much. But how would that work with India if they see, wait, you slapped a tariff on me and you didn't slap it on the Europeans? I mean, that seems that's going to put us in a big bind. How's that going to work out?
It is. There's so much bilateral trade between India and the United States. I even think part of the Apache helicopter and some of the other, globalized defense procurement schemes for some of these major U.S. Military products involved India, plus the IT sector, the big data sector, the Silicon Valley's links with India. It's not going to happen. There's no way. Even if, so Trump sat with Ursula von der Leyen, which was also entertaining recently, and he started. Yeah,
yesterday.
He started talking about windmills and his great golf courses, but he said that we're going to do this huge deal, this $750 billion energy deal, and you're going to buy all of your energy from us. Europe doesn't even have the infrastructure to handle that much LNG and to handle all of that, those imports that might or might not come from the United States. And then he says, well, the Europeans have agreed to do $600 billion and invest in the United States, sort of like the announcement he made when he was in Saudi Arabia in the Gulf. They're going to put $1 trillion in, and the next day it was another $1 trillion. Europe is not going to plow $600 billion of investment into the United States just because Donald Trump threatened them with a 15% tariff. It's not going to happen. I don't know where this is all straining credibility right now. Europe has no money to invest in the United States, so they're not going to make any big capital investments over 3 years. What they did is put a 3-year mark on it. You see the statement by the Europeans, say over 3 years. Well, at the end of 3 years, if anyone holds them, he won't be around. Trump's out. So no one's going to hold Europe accountable for that. This is all just kind of, sandcastles in the air sort of thing. And it's almost like people that are doing, when you do a public press conference with Trump, if you're a world leader, you just have to nod your head and just get through it, agree in principle, and then just get out of there. And then let the headlines go, because all Donald Trump wants is the headlines. He can't nail down any of this stuff. None of this stuff that was discussed in the Gulf is nailed down. And look at all the press he generated from that. Yeah, and it worked in the U.S. So I mean, that's kind of like what we're dealing with here. Wow, yeah, and there's certainly a lot to that. I mentioned at the outset here that all of these, this flurry of activity announced by Trump and the 10 days and whatever, I said that the Kremlin was kind of unfazed about this. I want to look a little bit. This is from, I believe this is from the Izvestia newspaper, one of the leading outlets in Russia. They weren't exactly afraid.
A member of the Presidential International Relations Council tells the paper, Moscow has reacted calmly to this. The ultimatum itself was not taken seriously, neither the 50 days nor the 10 to 12-day one. We are used to these kind of statements and reject them. This ultimatum does not add anything fundamentally new. It is aimed either at the domestic US audience or at European politicians who rejoice at any anti-Russian actions. Russian Senator Vladimir Jabarov tells the paper, ultimatums are usually presented to the losing side, which Russia is not. On the contrary, we are winning in the special military operation. Our position is a winning position. Why should we agree to an immediate ceasefire to satisfy Ukraine and its allies? Moscow has no intention of caving to pressure. The threat of new economic measures, including secondary sanctions, is likely to hit the US itself.
And look, that's a rational position for Russia to take. I mean, I'm sure nobody wants sanctions because there's always something you can do to cause some pain points here and there, but they have made their economy basically sanctions proof in terms of compelling any kind of actions against their interest. And they say, hey, this is probably going to hurt you worse than it is us, which they see. You just literally just talked about it. So what further does that do about the Russian side and their willingness to give in on anything?
Yeah, you have to remember that in terms of making their economy sanctions proof, the Russians have been doing this very diligently since around 2014. Okay, the big raft of sanctions that came after Crimea, and that did hurt Russia. It hurt them tremendously, and it took them out of the international financial system. They didn't have import replacements ready for a lot of important products. It caused shortages in the market, inflation, hit the ruble hard. But they doubled down, and they basically adapted, and they overcame. And they did that through massive state intervention in the economy, state ownership of a whole bunch of major industries. And Russia could do things as China can that the U.S. or Europe can't do because it's a different political economy. And they did. And so and they basically, they indemnified, they reinforced their economy for a rainy day that they knew was coming. So in a way, smartly, they knew that things were going to possibly get worse. And the thing that spooked Russia, and this is the other thing nobody in the United States talks about, what was the crash in the price of oil. just in the wake of 2013. And that plus sanctions really had them on their knees. So everything that Russia has in terms of their backstops are calculated for a very relatively low price of per barrel of oil. So they're not gauging it towards $100 a barrel, or it's way down there, like 50, 45, 60 max. And they know they can operate in that zone even under stress. Whereas that sort of thing would throw the U.S. economy and other economies into, or the Gulf economy into an absolute crisis. So listen, Russia's tightened its belt. They're disciplined. Everybody knows it. Every major European economist knows it. Christina Lagarde knows it. They all know it. So that's what the financial sector knows this. But the political sector in the West, they don't know this. And I'm wondering if they're talking to the top finance people, because everything I just said, anyone at the IMF or the World Bank could tell you soberly, but nobody in Washington will admit. And that's the crazy part about this.
Yeah, one of many crazy parts, if I could just add in there. And it's also, speaking of Russian reaction, there was an interesting battle, not on the front line, not on the line of contact, but in the ethosphere, internet sphere with on X. We had this exchange between Dmitry Medvedev and Lindsey Graham. First of all, Dmitry Medvedev started off by saying Trump's playing the ultimate game with Russia. 50 days or 10. He should remember two things. Russia isn't Israel or even Iran, which you talked about at the top of the show. And each new ultimatum is a threat and a step. And he goes on to talk about some more difficult things. Then Lindsey Graham responded to that. Gary, if you can roll to the top. Lindsey Graham responded by that and said, to those in Russia who believe that President Trump is not serious about ending the bloodbath between Russia and Ukraine, you and your customers will soon be sadly mistaken. You will also see that Joe Biden is no longer president. So a very unspecific threat, to which Medvedev again replied. Now, if you can roll down. Thank you, Gary. He says, it's not for you or Trump to dictate when we get to the peace table. Negotiations will end when the objectives of our military operation have been achieved. Work on America first, Gramps. And so, you have that's in one hand, it's kind of comical, but in the other hand, it just shows the state of affairs that we're talking about war and peace between, two officials from the two countries that are just kind of complaining back and forth. And Lindsey Graham thinks he's been clever. You can, though, say, though, that Medvedev is his message is a lot more serious, because Lindsey Graham's talking about sanctions, which we just discussed, and you talked about how, even people at the IMF and the international economic world know is an empty threat. Medvedev's isn't, because they can make good on that military threat in Ukraine. How do you read that?
Yeah, Medvedev is also one of the sort of best trolls on the internet of all time. So if there was a Premier League, he'd be right up there in the top of the league tables. So, but conversely, Lindsey Graham is just a clown at this point. Lindsey Graham is a guy that was gallivanting around Kiev, to over 10 years ago, promising this, that, and the other, flacking for war with John McCain. And the whole thing has been an absolute disaster for Ukraine and for everybody who was pushing for that. Some of these other hawks that were over there on stage with McCain at the time, like Chris Murphy, Democrat senator from Connecticut or something, a lot of them have toned down their hawkish rhetoric on this conflict because they know it's been a disaster. But Lindsey Graham is undeterred. He's carrying on the legacy of McCain. But the U.S. is making some serious threats in that, moving nuclear weapons into the United Kingdom. They just moved some nuclear bombers to RAF Lakenheath in the UK. That should be seen as a provocative move. Maybe, they did have nuclear weapons there in 2008. So it's been a while, almost 20 years since they've done that. They've done it here. It's important, I think, because it shows that there's more threats that they're going to roll out, and that this is a first level of escalation, if you will. I don't know if it's going to go much further than that, but that's kind of where we're at. Maybe that's Trump's, Washington's strategy, is to just front load negotiations with lots of different threats and try to create leverage. Anything but actually do real negotiations and actually listen to all the parties and actually tell Ukraine, give them some decent advice for once.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned you mentioned Lindsey Graham and his confident statements that he made when he announced, or the day before Trump announced a 50-day ultimatum. Lindsey Graham was talking really cocky about how we're going to kick Russia's ass on this, and and we're going to show them a thing or two. But he's the same guy that you may recall a year and a half or so ago, I think, when he went to Ukraine and made this big, bold splash about F-16s. We're going to bring F-16 pilots over. They are going to be game changers. The F-16s came. American pilots came. We actually got a word later on, retired pilots, et cetera. Didn't make any difference whatsoever in the air. He made this issue about Kursk when the Ukraine side went in Kursk in August of last year. He was all celebrating that. All of it came to nothing. We knew it was going to. It just resulted in a whole bunch more Ukrainian men dying and the loss of more equipment that they can't replace. So we think twice about listening to Lindsey Graham on anything, especially when it comes to economic matters, which he's got an even worse track record of. I want to shift in the amount of time we have left here. I don't want you to get away because I know you follow events in the Middle East really closely, and there's some developing issues, I think, which need to be addressed anyway. We've been talking about how Israel is set itself on a course in late November of 2023 using military means to try and achieve a political objective, which is peace and security for the people of Israel. And he was trying to do it with means that were never going to work. And so that's still the case. There's no change on that. The more evidence to validate the contention. But now it's not just the war. They won't admit that and continue on the war. Now then you have an entire population starting to move past the point of starvation to starvation deaths and massive malnutrition, so that even many Western countries have finally had enough. It's embarrassing it took this long, but at least it's finally happening. And I want to start off by, first of all, showing what Keir Starmer said here a couple of days ago.
The appalling scenes in Gaza are unrelenting. And I know the British people are sickened by what is happening. The images of starvation and desperation are utterly horrifying. The denial of aid to children and to babies is completely unjustifiable, just as the continued captivity of hostages is completely unjustifiable. Hundreds of civilians have been killed while seeking aid, children killed whilst collecting water. It is a humanitarian catastrophe, and it must end. We've put millions of pounds of aid into Gaza. We've announced an extra 40 million this year. But that help is not getting in.
So first of all, I want to start off with the fact that the UK is saying this because they have, at least in the early, maybe even the last first 3 quarters of this war, we're pretty much in lockstep with the United States and just blanket, whatever Israel says. Now, all of a sudden, here in the last couple of months, they've been pushing back a little bit more, and this is pretty strong here. And now UK, according to information I got just before coming on the air, is giving serious consideration and may actually recognize a Palestinian state. Apparently others are as well. What do you account for the change, first of all, in the UK?
I'm very cynical about this. I see so far, maybe there's something coming in terms of policy, but all I see so far is a change in rhetoric. I see a change in rhetoric. I don't see any real change in actions. As he's making that, as this starvation's happening, as Palestinians are being shot, as they queue for food down these, concentration camp rat runs constructed by the Israelis and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and U.S. contractors and whatnot. The UK was conducting overflights, The RAF was conducting overflights and surveillance, intelligence gathering for Israel from RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus. Okay, that was reported by a number of people. Okay, so I don't see the actions or the policies backing it up. I mean, think of the embargo and the sanctions that have been, you mentioned it yourself, Daniel, thousands of sanctions being placed on Russia after the SMO began in February 2022. And those are two militaries fighting each other. In fact, NATO is fighting Russia effectively there. And yet you have Israel, a world-class nuclear-armed, powerful military, using the full strength of their U.S. and British weapons to target civilians in contravention of every single treaty and international law that ever practically existed. And no sanctions or talk of suspending diplomatic relations at the Security Council, suspending Israel's membership to the United Nations. None of that coming from the UK or France. Macron announced that they're going to maybe recognize a Palestinian state at some point later this year, maybe next year. Britain has basically done the same, but they haven't inked it down on paper. It's a promise that they are going to consider doing it at some point in the future. Now, that basically means that if pressed by the Israelis, they could say, well, we haven't done it yet. So it's kind of a political PR poker game going on where the governments are so behind the eight ball morally on this issue that they're having to play poker with their own electorates on this. And that's kind of like what I see in France. That's what I see in the UK. They just proscribed a grassroots activist organization called Palestine Action as a terrorist group, just in the last couple of weeks. Hugely unpopular, massive public backlash. So they're basically prosecuting anybody that is supporting a group that wants to stop the genocide and stop the transfer of arms from Israeli British companies from going to commit a genocide. That's basically the position of the government right now. So they do realize that they're in trouble. David Lammy, the foreign secretary, he has also done this volte-face on condemning Israel when basically not pushing back at all for the longest period of time. And now it's same as Starmer. So there is the rhetoric is there. I'm just waiting for the policies to match the rhetoric. And then then it's game on. Then we might see, I agree. We might see some light at the end of the tunnel on this, but I don't see that yet. So I don't see that light yet.
Although I would argue that you first have to have the rhetorical change before you can get to the policy. They can't go from 100 to 0 overnight. Mm-hmm. But I remain skeptical too. Even that headline Gary just put up there added a caveat that I had not seen prior to coming on the air, which is that the UK would recognize Palestinian unless Israel does something else, which I assume probably, if you read it, probably means to open up the gates for food. Well, that has nothing to do with the statehood issues, so I don't know why that's being connected. But let me tell you somebody who's not confused at all and is very, very consistent and has a very, shall we say, unique view of what's truth and what's not. And that is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said there's no starvation going on.
Israel is presented as though we are applying a campaign of starvation in Gaza. What a bold-faced lie. There is no policy of starvation in Gaza, and there is no starvation in Gaza.
What say you?
So this is a government with the full cooperation support of the United States, the Biden administration, and the Trump administration that demonized the UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, we talked about this on this program, and you've talked about it with other guests as well, that has provided aid and support and facilitated the distribution of food, the preparation of food, that medical care, counseling, all these basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs in Gaza since the 1950s. UNRWA has done that and employed some 30,000 Palestinians so one of the biggest employers in Gaza, was then labeled a terrorist organization by the Israelis, just arbitrarily. They said, oh, there's some Hamas people in the in UNRWA, this giant organization. And so then the United States went in lockstep with Israel, as did the Europeans, as did the British, and didn't push back a bit on this. And basically that was it. UNRWA was then being targeted. UN staff have been killed. And the worst part about it is they used that to withhold all of the aid. 300 to 400 articulated lorries, semi-trucks that go in daily into the Gaza Strip, suspended in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, and only drip feeding in small amounts since then. And then when Trump came in, Witkoff said, oh, it's wonderful. We've got a ceasefire. Let's let the food in. And they did for a few weeks. And then a brutal siege was imposed.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing now are the worst scenes in history. No one in our lifetimes ever seen such.
Yeah.
Such
Gary,
things.
do you have any of the B-roll from that? Any of the fresh stuff, if you can possibly show some of that? I want people to see what we're talking about. Yeah, go ahead. Continue, Patrick.
Yeah, and it's these are just the most sadistic scenes of people, throngs of people in the desert heat, showing up, down these sort of barbed wire paths that have been selected to herd them in to pick up parcels of food, and then being shot at, or stun grenades thrown at them, tear gassed as they're going to get food. So that's the daily reality for people in Gaza. It's the most obscene. These are the most obscene scenes that you could possibly imagine. Now they're talking about airdropping aid in Gaza. And so this is a way for Western countries, for Starmer and others say, oh, we're going to drop. Jordan already did that. The Jordanians already did that a year and a half ago. Piecemeal dropping aid into Gaza, but that all has to be done under Israeli supervision as well. And we're talking about, morsels here. All the aid is there in position. Look at this. I mean, this is just this isn't even the worst of the stuff, the scenes that are visible now. So, I mean, it's all there. The supplies are there. It's been paid for. Everything is there, but it's not allowed in. And that is because Israel controls ultimately the Rafah border crossing. Not only that, Israeli citizens are mobilizing to stop aid. Settlers are being allowed by the Israeli government with no protest, of course, from the United States or Europe. They won't lift a finger to condemn any of these Israeli settlers that are attacking aid convoys. And it came out that Israel was basically arming and funding sort of ISIS affiliates in there, also to disrupt aid deliveries and then to blame it on Hamas. That also came out in the last few months and weeks. So it's just really unbelievable, the scenes that we're seeing and how it's been allowed to get to this point. How on earth can this sustain for so long? And it's not as if it's even staying the same or the level of deprivation has just been constant. No, it's been getting steadily worse over the last 20 months, steadily worse. So where is this going to go from here? You're going to see, you see a famine that's developing now. We all grew up with stories about World War II and how in the Jewish ghettos a policy of starvation was enacted by the Nazis, and the health effects that people had, that people became crippled after that. They never recovered from the malnutrition, has severe, debilitating health effects. And we've all been raised with these stories and understanding this part of history. And here it is playing out right in front of us on an arguably an even greater scale, and being done with the full backing and full endorsement of the G7 countries. I mean, they could have easily imposed some kind of stringent conditions on Israel to open up and to allow aid in. It could have been done. That would have been just the bare minimum, but it would have been enough. But no, that has not been allowed. And so this is where we're at now.
And listen, so that was Netanyahu that we just showed a minute ago here. Well, there's those in the United States that seem to agree with him that it's all a bunch of fakery. And here is the United States ambassador backing up Netanyahu.
This idea that there is massive starvation by the thousands, a lot of the pictures that people are showing, they're not even realistic. In fact, there's one of them that shows a little boy. It's a terrible looking picture, tragic. But it turns out the little boy has a congenital medical condition. He's not starving. And the Israelis actually sent him to a hospital to get treatment. In another case, you see a child that is touted as being starving. He's next to his mother, who is obese. So somebody's eating. It wasn't the little boy, but the truth is he also had a medical condition. Liz, I'm not going to tell you there's not suffering in Gaza. There's a lot of suffering in Gaza, but here's the reason they're suffering: because of Hamas. These are animals. They're savages. They've murdered people. They've held hostages. They've tortured the hostages. They moved their civilians in the front of military targets. They have increased and caused the suffering. And if there's hunger, a lot of it is because when the food does go in, Hamas steals it and then turns around and sells it.
So some of the pictures of starving kids are not really starving kids. And if anybody's at fault, it's going to be the Hamas's fault. No problem at all with what Israel's doing. How do you respond?
No, it's typical. They'll find some, anecdotal anomaly or some way to semantic argument as to, he's got the kid's got a medical condition that's probably derived from malnutrition. Okay. I mean, the infant mortality in Gaza, the fact that they have blown up all the hospitals, they've destroyed almost every working medical facility servicing a population of what used to be 2.5 million that somehow has whittled down below 2 million, and nobody can explain why, based on the latest data analysis that has been released in the last couple of weeks. 477,000 missing or dead. Okay, we're not talking about 60,000 dead in terms of the official registered named losses there. So Mike Huckabee is just unbelievable how he could say this with a straight face. And this idea that they're saying, oh, the hostages. There's 9,000 Palestinians that are in arbitrary detention, kidnapped, tortured, raped in custody. There's plenty of evidence. The United Nations Human Rights Council put out a very, very detailed report on all of this many times. It's in the International Courts of Justice case file as well. And this is the U.S. ambassador to Israel that has the gumption to go on global television and deny the fact that there is a famine going on as we speak, as the United States supports withholding aid into the Gaza Strip for the last going on 2 years. How could he say such a thing? I mean, it's just so inhumane from somebody that's supposed to be representing the United States government that is clearly not objective in how he's evaluating the situation. And that is very disturbing.
Basic humanity is absent from that, which is what I find the most disturbing. I mean, if he was just in anguish about what had happened, and gosh, we just got to find a solution, something. But instead, he's like, okay, there's a little bit of suffering. I'm not going to say there's not, but it's Hamas's fault, et cetera. So he totally doesn't care anything about the Palestinian people who are grotesquely suffering when they're well, all right, I don't want to go down a path I've been on before, but that's the ambassador. But the head of our country seemed to give a complete green light to Israel just a week ago when Trump said this.
Pulled out in terms of negotiating. It was too bad. Hamas didn't really want to make a deal. I think they want to die, and it's very, very bad. And it got to be to a point where you're going to have to finish the job. They really, they asked for things. Don't forget, we got a lot of hostages out. So now we're down to the final hostages, and they know what happens after you get the final hostages. And basically, because of that, they really didn't want to make a deal. I saw that. So they pulled out, and they're going to have to fight, and they're going to have to clean it up. You're going to have to get rid of them.
You're going to have to get rid of them. And so if there's any question about what the policy is of the United States, I think that's it there. Trump today apparently said, oh, yeah, there is some starvation going on. More like, look at that. Nothing's going to come from that, because that's what seems to be really the driving force behind the United States. So why would Netanyahu ever back down and change anything he wants to do?
The annoying thing about Donald Trump, it's beyond annoying by this point, but how he just arbitrarily leaves everything vague. where he says, we're going to have to get rid of them. We're going to have to finish the job. So get rid of who? Get rid of Hamas or get rid of the native Palestinian population in Gaza? Oh, we're going to have to finish the job. What is finishing the job? Is finishing the job a final solution? Is it pulverizing the remaining inhabitable structures in the Gaza Strip? Trump intentionally leaves things vague so he can never be pinned down on specifics. And this is just kind of a nefarious tactic for a president of the United States dealing with such a unbelievable Holocaust that's happening right now in Gaza. And we can use those terms because everybody's using these terms now. Okay, it's beyond the pale right now. And you know what? Hamas wanted to make a deal. They agreed to multiple ceasefires. And Israel broke every single one, and the United States did the worst possible thing, which they basically negotiated a ceasefire and then pulled the rug out from under them. Part of it, and because the U.S. won't publicly acknowledge that Israel's holding actual hostages, 9,000 of them, and that's part of the negotiations. If they publicly say that, the U.S. president or any U.S. mainstream media pundit, they'll probably lose their job. Or they'll be harangued by the lobby because the lobby wants to erase that, to make it seem like the Palestinians don't want to have a ceasefire, that they don't want to have a deal. Oh, we gave them a perfectly good offer. They've been using this shtick for 30 plus years, by the way, since Oslo. And that's the point of it. And it's the final hostages that Hamas have are combatants. My understanding of it, if not most of them, if not all of them, these are IDF soldiers or reservists, the final ones. So those aren't hostages. Those are POWs, if you want to get technical about it, because they say it's a war. They say this is a war against Hamas. So if it's a war, then any IDF soldiers or reservists are POWs. So again, I know this is just labels and it might not mean anything to some people, but there are rules for the Geneva Conventions. There are international rules that previous administrations at least pretended to abide by. Yeah. But now there's no rules. There's no agreement on terms. There's nothing. It's just complete chaos. And Trump is working within that environment to basically do nothing productive other than what? Ethnic cleansing and the total extermination of the native population in Gaza. Yeah. That's where we're headed.
Well, and we only have a couple of minutes left here. That's kind of what I was going to ask you to tag us out today. Where is this going to go? Not where should it go, but where do you think it is going to go? We'll just say in the next 3 months.
I am so not positive about any of this. There's only one thing that can happen that could change the trajectory of this, and that's that one European country within the EU, it would just take one, would then announce that their government is going to fully sanction Israel, and then that would probably be followed by 2 and 3 and 4 others. And at that point, you would have some momentum, political momentum, in the same way that apartheid South Africa suddenly felt the brunt of the international political force and the economic force that was going to follow that, as well as the negative media coverage that would be coming down the pipeline against Israel with that. But aside from that, there's going to be no military intervention. There's no country that's going to step up, definitely not Egypt, which is the only one that could conceivably intervene humanitarian-wise. The United States could, but they're not sending anybody to deliver aid. Instead, they're sending contractors with a shady outfit run out of Switzerland called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that's basically killed at least 1,000 Palestinians queuing up for bread and canned goods. So that's not going to fly. There's no U.S. intervention there. It gets back to UNRWA. This was the master plan, was to dismantle, to demonize, dismantle, and destroy the UN Relief and Works Agency. That was basically capturing the king on the chessboard. And they went for that early. And everything that follows that, there's no solution. You can't create an aid distribution network that's going to work to replace something as so. UNRWA was the cement, the grout that held the bricks together in Gaza for almost 80 years, 70, almost 70 years. You can't just pull that out, and there's nothing that can replace it. And they knew that. Washington knew that. Tel Aviv knew that, and they cynically did it. And that's why we have this incredible disaster unfolding.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to leave it there for now, and just keep watching it and hoping we get that momentum that you're talking about. So it goes from rhetoric to actual policy actions. That's what we. I guess that's the best hope we can to end this suffering, because unfortunately, leadership from the Washington doesn't seem to be willing to use its leverage. Thank you very much for coming on today, Patrick, on all these issues. We always really appreciate having you come on. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Danny.
And we thank you guys too. By the way, just to let you know, we have Omar Bartov on. Patrick there just used the word that he's going. Omar Bartov is going, who's the head of the genocide scholar at Brown University, published a piece in the New York Times where he says, "I know what genocide is. I study it, and I know it when I see it." He's also been on saying some other things on that you're not going to want to miss. That's today at 2 p.m., actually just a few minutes from now, as it turns out. And we've got Doug McGregor coming back at 4 p.m. and this afternoon. You're not going to want to miss that one either. Doug McGregor and Omar Bartov coming up shortly. Thanks, and we'll see you in a few minutes on our channel, Daniel Davis Deep Dive.